Hello everyone and welcome back to our revision videos. This video this week is for year 11, so if you are year 10 you should be looking at the Macbeth video. Today year 11 we're going to look at power and conflict poetry, and we're going to look at the theme of identity. And what we're going to do throughout this video is we're going to look at in detail Checking Out My History by John Agard and the Emigree by Carol Rumans. Okay, so the first poem that we're going to investigate is John Agard's Checking Out My History. We're going to look at poet's intentions, any structural comments that you could make, language analysis, and then for each language analysis there is a key link that you could make to the Emigree. And then we're going to then explore the Emigree's intentions, structural comments, key analysis, and obviously any other links that you can make to John Agard. So this is sort of looking at how you might compare these two poems if the theme of identity came up and one of these poems came up as well. So on the screen there you can see there's three intentions for John Agard. So Agard uses the poem Checking Out My History to criticise the loss of identity at the hands of the British colonial education system. He also uses the poem to celebrate the power of self-discovery of one's own identity. And he also condemns these powerful institutions that have purposefully stripped people of their identity. They are three key messages delivered by Agard through his poem, okay? And you can definitely see that through the use of language that we will look at in a little bit. Obviously, it's really useful to make some structural comments when you're analysing poetry, and there are quite a few here. Obviously, you're not going to be expected to remember 4 structural devices for every poem in the anthology, but these are just there for you to decide which ones are most useful. So obviously, you've got the repetition of dem, tell me, okay? That sort of idea that Agard is reinforcing the oppression that those faced in Guyana and countries like Guyana. You've got the use of italics when he's exploring his own history and his own knowledge of his history, and you've got that clear distinction between the knowledge that's been taught by the British colonial system, and you've got the knowledge that he has then sought out once he's realised that gaps of his identity have been caused by the colonial education system. You've got also the use of dialect, which is really critical to analyse. So the use of the me and the dem, okay, so the dialect is the way in which you pronounce the words that you speak. And this is Agard placing complete ownership on his identity. It's celebrating his identity. He is encouraging people to read his poetry in his dialect and therefore sort of feel that he is celebrating his identity. You could also argue that, you know, for people reading the poem in Agard's sort of dialect, the Guyanan dialect, it could bring out in a reader some discomfort, and that's because maybe they're not used to speaking in that dialect. And obviously that could link to this idea that due to the fact that Agard's identity was removed from the history books, removed from the British colonial education system, that when Agard finally sought out his identity, there was maybe some discomfort there. It was like this new entity that he hadn't considered, and he was getting used to sort of this realisation that this is a part of who he is. You've also got the use of enjambment throughout the poem. There is no punctuation used in Agard's poem, and this could be really Agard's intention to overthrow the strict colonial education that he experienced and that was forced upon him. So he's sort of rejecting that by ignoring sort of the British standard punctuation. Genuinely, this is such a fantastic poem to analyse. There is so much you can say. It's the language, the imagery is so rich, and I really would recommend sort of diving into this language analysis. Okay, so now we're going to look at the language analysis of checking out my history. You can obviously see that I have at the top of each box linked back to the poet's intentions. So each box looks at the different intention and different quotations you could use to support that intention. So the first one we're going to look at is Agard's criticism of the British colonial education system and how that has caused a loss of identity. Throughout the poem, as I've just said, he repeats the phrase "dem tell me" and what dem want to tell me. And firstly, we've got to look at the use of the pronoun dem, okay? And this emphasises the white hegemony of the British colonial system. And what hegemony means is it's the leadership or the dominance, especially by a state or a social group. And what we can see here is the dominance of the British colonial system in countries that have been colonised, okay? And what we have here is Agard really criticising this oppression that he faced and others face at the hands of this system. Now we can make a really seamless link to the Emigree here because, again, the Carol Rubens in her poem states they accuse me of being dark in their free city, okay? And what we can see here is that both poets use the plural pronoun they and dem, okay? So dem is they in the dialect. And this highlights the sense of oppression faced by allied groups. And what that means is that allied means that groups that are ignored and missed out. Here, both poets show a frustration that they are not accepted in a place that they consider home. And just to summarise there, we can see that Agard feels that his own identity has been othered, okay, because it was removed from the education that was taught in his school. Okay, moving on then, we've obviously got this idea that he is condemning these institutions and he is condemning the fact that they have purposefully stripped people of their identity. You've got the title, which is always really useful to analyse, so checking out my history. And even this title proves that what should be an automatic understanding, he has had to take it upon himself to seek his identity out. We also have this sense of pride as Agard has now, as he's got older, this sense of autonomy, which is independence, and he's stripped himself of the oppression that was forced upon him. So we can see that there is definitely a celebratory tone throughout the poem. Then we've got bandage up my eye with my own history. And here you've got that verb bandage, which intensifies the idea that because of the loss of his identity, it has physically wounded Agard and forcefully blinded him to his identity. And again, we've got a really lovely seamless link that we can make to the Emigree, okay? Because we've got that clear sense of oppression in both poems. We've got, obviously, dem tell me, bandage, okay, phrases that really exhibit this oppression. And then we've got Rubens in her poem that uses the lexical field, and lexical just means word, okay, so she uses lots of words to do with ideas around war and oppression. So you've got those quotes there that time rolls its tanks, so the tanks links to the war. You've got the words band, accuse and lie, and what we see here is that Rubens is criticising those in power who have a hold over vulnerable members of society. There's clear evidence that the speaker feels forced and cornered, which again links to this idea of oppression by both of the speakers in both poems. And finally, for Agard's poem, as I mentioned before, we've got that celebratory tone to his poem, and we've got this idea that Agard is ecstatic that he has the power of self-discovery when he's older. He has that ability to seek out his identity, seek out his history and his heritage. And obviously you've got that key quotation, which is "to sont to beacon," okay? And we've got clear imagery of light, and that highlights the hope that real historical figures provide for Agard, and that hope is only possible because he's been able to access that research by himself, okay? And without that hope, it wouldn't exist. And we've got this idea that his search into his identity has revealed inspirational historical figures that provide inspiration to those communities that have been ignored or oppressed. It's also important to understand who Toussaint Louverture is, okay? And he's a famous Haitian revolutionist and a figure who, without his own research, Agard and others may never have known, okay? And what I quite like here is, in some way, Toussaint was a revolutionary, and what we have here through Agard's poem is he being his own, is he sort of committing his own poetic revolution, and is he leading a poetic revolution against this British colonial system? Is an interesting thought. Then the last one, another one of my favourite quotes for Agard's poem, is "I carving out my identity," okay? And you've got that word, or verb, carving, should I say, and this shifts the tone of the poem, okay? As it shows that Agard has stopped allowing other people and systems to control him and to control his view of his identity, and he's taking a stand and he's reclaiming his identity from his oppressors, and he's ensuring that this is completed permanently. And obviously you can link that language, which we're going to do in a couple of slides. We're going to link that language to Rumen's use of the word branded, and branded by an impression of sunlight, okay? Again, this permanence. Okay, so let's talk about Carol Rumen's poem, The Emigree then, okay? Now, intentions wise, we've got Rumen's exploring the connection between a person, their home country, and how that is inextricably linked, so completely linked. We've got this devastation that she demonstrates for those who feel like they have abandoned their country and therefore lost their identity. And then we've got this clear, from the speaker, determination felt by those who are seeking to maintain their identity that they feel like they have lost or will lose. Okay, structurally then, we've got the use of ellipsis, which is really easy to talk about, okay, and that's the use of the ... after there once was a country. And this idea, it creates a fantastical tone, almost like it's a fantasy, as you would hear in a fairy story about Cinderella or whatnot. And it's also this idea that it's adding emphasis to this memory that she's about to recall. And this speaker, is going to take the reader on a bit of a journey. You've also got the use of caesura, okay, which is the use of the punctuation in the lines, and this shows that her commentary is list-like, which highlights her desire to relive her memories. And it also, if you're creating a list, lots of reasons why people create lists is so that they can remember things. Like if you're writing a shopping list, you're writing a shopping list so that you remember what you need when you're in the shop. And that could also link to this idea that this memory has been retained from childhood, and it's really important for the speaker to relive these memories repeatedly to ensure that they do not forget or do not feel like they're forgetting their identity. Then you've obviously got the repetition of they, okay, which I touched on in the previous slide, but this is like with a sense of aggression, and it's an accusatory tone, and it makes the new city seem very hostile. It highlights how the new threat is not one of a physical conflict, but it's a physical rejection, okay? The speaker feels that their identity is lost because either they cannot forge a new identity in their new country because people are so unwilling to welcome them, or maybe the speaker feels that they are too determined to hold on to their old identity, that they're not willing to sort of open their hearts to a new sort of home. Okay, so language analysis for Rumans' poem, The Emigree. And again, just like the AGARD slide, I've got the key intentions at the top of each box. We're going to go through each quotation and then we're going to make a direct link back to John AGARD's poem, just so you can see consistently how we can make these links, some more obvious links and some more subtle links. Okay, so the first intention is looking at how a home, country and an identity with a person is inextricably linked. Okay, we've got that quotation where she says, "I left it as a child, but my memory is sunlight clear." We've got here the use of imagery of light, and this is intensifying the connection the speaker has with their home country, and it's something that's very clearly providing hope for them. But what we have to really consider is the fact that they've left this home country as a child, but their memory is almost permanent and has not been tainted in any way. Okay, they've got this clarity of their identity, which obviously is unusual, because memories that you have as a child and when you grow older fade over time, and you can maybe ad-lib some scenarios, or you imagine scenarios, or you lose gaps in your memory. So it's quite unusual that the speaker feels that their memory is completely permanent and untainted. And then what we've got here is a really nice link to AGARD's poem. Okay, we've got that juxtaposition between sunlight clear and being blinded and bandaged. Okay, and it's this idea that AGARD feels that his identity was never exposed. Okay, he was never informed of his country's history, and the only way he could seek this was when through age and through maturity. So therefore we've obviously got that interesting idea that maybe Rumans as speaker isn't that reliable. Can we really truly rely on their memory being sunlight clear after they've grown up and adjusted in a new country and new experiences? That's obviously something you could consider. Next, we're going to look at how we've got this devastation felt by people who need to abandon their country, and how that abandonment impacts their identity. First quotation we're going to look at is, "The worst news I receive of it cannot break my original view." Okay, and what we've got here is this implication that the speaker is completely reluctant to allow anything to stain or taint their view of their home country. And it shows that her connection to her identity is too powerful, and therefore it is impossible to break. And again, we've got this idea that it may be at war, it may be sick with tyrants, but I am branded by an impression of sunlight. Again, this intensifies the speaker's reluctance to accept that their memory can be anything other than perfect. And then obviously we've got that really nice link, because we've got the reference to sunlight, we've got that branded, and here we've got also link it to AGARD, because he uses the imagery of light in his poem, and it shows how being connected to their identity allows them enlightenment, okay, and also proves that they are unwilling to forget. So just to remind you that the use of imagery of light in AGARD's poem is when he says "tu sont a beacon." Okay, the beacon is this idea that it's a light source. Not only that, okay, we don't even stop there. Okay, we could then analyse the verbs carving and branded. Okay, so carving is from AGARD's poem, branded is clearly from Rumans' poem, and it's this idea that it shows that they are both determined to withhold their identities, and it shows like how important their identities are. Okay, next we're going to look at this determination to maintain their identity. So obviously we've got that there once was a country, which we talked about in the structural comments, the idea of fantasy. We've got the use of my city. So again, we've got this possessiveness to hold and maintain identity and memories. and we can link that again to Agard's poem with that sense of possessiveness through the possessive pronoun my. Okay, it's repeated throughout the poem. Contrastingly though, Agard's link to his identity is formed as an adult and through self-exploration, whereas the speaker in the Emigree, their memory is retained from childhood, which therefore suggests that this memory may have been weakened by the passage of time, or their memory is a childlike view of the world, so therefore maybe not that reliable. Okay, and finally, I just want to show you how I would construct my introduction, making comparisons between the Emigree and checking out my history. And the way I would do it is using the both, however, whereas rule. Okay, so you use those 3 words in your introduction and it clearly indicates to the examiner where you are going to take your essay. So, both poets explore how one's identity is inextricably linked to one's home country. However, Agard's poem is deeply critical of the powerful institutions that stripped him of his identity, yet his poem is also filled with a sense of power, as Agard proves the importance of reclaiming your identity. Whereas Ruben's poem investigates the sense of loss felt by those who must flee their country, and they feel limited to continue to pursue their identity. Right, I really tried to keep it below 25 minutes because a few of you mentioned the time of my videos, so I scraped it by 3 minutes, guys. Hope this was really helpful. Use it to revise, and I'll see you next week for your next revision video.